Who are these guys anyway? I mean, that's a question that everyone's asking, Ty. Who the hell are we listening to? Like, we started this off thinking maybe best case scenario, our moms would be listening to these,
and
as
would
it
love
turns
it.
out, and would love it for
and would love
sure. 5 stars, 2 stellar reviews from our respective mothers. But as it turns out, thankfully, we've had some more people listening than just moms. So we thought we might do a little bit of a backstory for folks that don't maybe know us personally, share kind of what we've been up to. It's worth noting that season 1 was recorded 2 years ago, over 2 years ago. Yeah. So we decided to do this, recorded like 12 episodes, put them in the can, got busy, and then finally circled back. We're like, well, should we do something with these and actually get serious about this? And then finally release them over the past, few months. So here we are, recording closer to real time. This episode will air in, a week or two. So want to do a little bit of background. I don't know where should we start? That's the backstory, but where do you want to dive in, Mr. Ty?
Yeah. I mean, the reason we really wanted to do this, number one, is to go, this is Ty, this is Nathan, this is what we're doing. And we talk so much about other artists in the studio and their trials and their challenges and what they're overcoming. And we try to kind of pair it to how we're doing in the studio and the things that we're working on in our life. But there's so much desert in the artist studio. There's just so much dry spells and dry things for us that things move very slow for us as artists. And so I thought, hey, why don't we just talk about what we've been up to? Because we need to celebrate the really exciting moments as much as we talk about the really down and low moments too. So we're going to kind of go back and forth over the last 2 years and talk about things that have happened or frustrations we've had, cool things that have happened to us that we didn't expect to happen that kind of blew us out of the water. And then things are like, man, I don't even know how I got here. And this was really hard to even get to this moment. So I guess let's start with, how in the world do you and I know each other?
Let's just note too, so if you're here, if you've been listening to previous episodes for the talk about actual, I was about to say actual artists, but sure, historically significant artists.
This will be very different.
If you're mildly curious about us or what we've been up to or lessons learned, I think we'll have a few takeaways and things that we've learned from our experiences over the last couple of years. Then, hang around and see if it might be of interest to you. But hey, Ty
Nathan,
and I...
Nathan, don't be so down on yourself. I mean, I think this week I remember a phone call where you told me, all right, Ty, take a deep breath, get your cortisol levels up. Let's do this. Confidence.
That's right. Well, listen, as with most things in life, we're much better at giving advice than we are at receiving it or giving advice to ourselves. So thank you for that check on the positive self-talk. We'll circle back. We'll close out today's episode with some positive affirmations that you too can use while you're in the studio and just, fumbling your way through life like us. So Ty and I know each other from your mentorship program. Ty's got a fantastic mentorship program that I participated in the summer of 2021. Wow. Does that sound right?
Yeah. I think it was the second session. Yeah.
That's right. Yep. So for me, that was, I haven't really shared my backstory in the art path. For me, that was like 6 months into my time even making art. So I spent over 20 years in a completely different space. Got a chance to exit that and pursue a creative life full time at the end of 2020. Wasn't sure what I was going to do. Got this studio space with a crazy harebrained idea to just make stuff for a living. Not even sure what that was even going to look like or what I was going to be making. Drove to Michael's one day, said, I haven't painted for, 20 years. Let me see what I can do. So bought some cheap canvases and cheap, acrylics. And the very first day, like the moment I put a brush to canvas, I was brought back to the last time I had painted, which was college, high school. And I was like, this is it. This is all I want to do the rest of my life. And so found you, I think on Instagram, participated in your mentorship program, learned a ton. We became friends, stayed in touch, and that's kind of how this all came to be. So that's our backstory, and we have a lot of things in common outside of art as well that we discuss off camera. Like y'all don't need to know our thoughts on the NBA Western Conference playoff picture. Who cares?
Yeah.
Anyway. Back to you.
I've been slugging along at this for a long time. I grew up in a family where my uncle was a world-renowned sculptor and raku artist and potter, and he taught in the university system in California. So I was around it all the time. And so I've always had this dream in the back of my head to make art, always make art. And my grandfather would teach me about art, and I was always had my eyes on art, and my parents supported me in it. Parents always supported me in everything, but they always had art supplies. And so I always made art. And so went to art school, but also played sports on a scholarship during art school. So it was that weird, I don't know, a lot of guys called me the MTV basketball player because I was an art guy. And at that time, Real World was starting. So there was this crossover of life and art and sports. But my goal was art my whole life. And so like you know, I worked in the job circuit, worked in retail, you know, worked in fashion, I worked in video and film. I've done all these different things to get to the point where someday I could actually make art full time. And I took that step, I think 9-10 years ago, I don't know. And then just been slugging along trying to figure this out. But all that time previous, grade school, high school, college, after, I was making art. Anytime I had the opportunity, I was making art in a bedroom, in a back porch, in a garage, you know, all those things with the dream of someday having a studio and being able to do this. So here we are today, and I'm working with artists. I'm showing art. I've got these friendships from art that are just incredible. And we have a podcast where we get to talk about the things we love about art. And for me, you and I said in the beginning, if there's 5 people or 50 people or just our moms that listen to us, we're talking about art on the phone regularly anyways. So let's just go ahead and record it. So we're going to talk about some things that we've done in the past 2 years while the podcast has been live. We'll kind of just jump back and forth and talk about some things we've learned and what we're doing and where we're going. And please, as we say at the end of every episode, send us messages, send us Instagram messages and ask us, I don't know, tips, hints, talk about things that you're learning. We'd love to hear. And we are going to do a Q&A episode at some point where we just take questions from all over the world and we just answer them on air.
At least one. We might make that a regular thing.
Even if it's just our moms that ask the questions, I'm sure they'll be great.
Save it for the pod, Mom. All right.
Yeah.
Stop calling. No, I love that. I think we should probably begin by the most significant change in your world, which is that you now have a budding studio director. Of course, I've got Leo, my studio director, my dog, and you have now joined the club of dog ownership. Yeah, he's probably keeping you from making art more than he's helping you at this point.
Nathan. Yeah, so let's just say since December when we got little Charlie Cash at, what was he, 3 pounds when we got him, I haven't slept much. So let's just say it's been, you know, a few months of not a lot of sleep, and we're artists, so we have a hard time sleeping anyways. So you just impact that with a puppy who I love dearly and is by my side every second, but who will eventually be my studio director, 100%.
Heck yeah, that's the best. Where do you want to jump in?
Yeah, let's jump into maybe our highlight of the last 2 years, something monumental that's really exciting for us, something that's just been wonderful to work through and put time into. So you had your first solo exhibition and your second solo exhibition within the recording of the podcast over the last 2 years.
Since season 1. Yeah.
Since season 1. Yeah. Talk to me about just that emotion and that. What did that do to you when you got that first call or that first notice of, hey, we would love to have you for a solo exhibition at the gallery? What was that like?
Well, as anyone who shares their art, online knows, we get 99% of the DMs that you get or messages are complete, BS. So once I realized it was real, I had to pinch myself. I was like, oh, this is really happening.
Yeah.
Spoke to Taylor at another gallery and saw the space, realized like it's just, it was going to be a great fit. And so it quickly went from this sort of surreal sense of, oh, this is really happening, to holy crap, I've got 7 weeks to make a whole bunch of work.
So he didn't want to buy he didn't want to buy an NFT of your work. He actually wanted to show your work.
That's accurate. That is exactly right. Yep. And so like actual physical pieces hanging on the wall. And so it quickly became like, all right, this is exciting, but I got a lot of work to do in a short amount of time. And so I'm super thankful for, both shows, but especially the first one, the way they really forced me to get specific and focused around working in sets. That's one of the
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest things I had to learn fairly quickly is like, all right, previously I had done and still do a lot of experimentation.
Yeah.
For anybody that doesn't see my process videos or follow me on Instagram, I use a lot of repurposed material. I do a lot of burning and carving and breaking down a material, building it back up. A lot of steps. I can't knock out pieces, quickly. So I can make a lot of work in a short amount of time, but they all involve a lot of steps and require a lot of space. So for me, that first show was really, it forced me to get real focused on working through 3 to 5 pieces at a time in sets to continue to move work forward. And I actually am thankful now for my experience with spreadsheets before, because you and I have never talked about this, but I have now developed a quote unquote system where I've got each piece in process, the next steps that need to happen, how that corresponds to the journaling that I've done about and just listening and figuring out kind of what's next. So it really forced me to figure a lot of things out in a short amount of time.
Well, and so how many total works did you create for the show? And then how many works were actually curated into the show? Was there a difference?
There was, yeah. So we had, after talking, looking at what I already had, when we decided to put the show together and realize that it was going to be a fairly short, time frame, I believe it was four pieces that I already had done.
Okay.
That I ended up taking with. I made 24 more in that period of time. 2 months, just under. And then so of those 28, we ended up hanging, I think 20 or 21. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I drove the work out. So I live in Minneapolis. I drove the work out to Denver.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a cost in shipping and sending work that wasn't going to hang anyway. So we kind of did the curating on site deciding. Yeah.
Well, and walk me through just the difference of, number one, creating the work in the studio and then taking it to the gallery and getting it in the space and then looking at it in the gallery. Did it hold a new light for you, or did it still feel the same?
No, it held a completely new light. And I this is going to sound funny, but I felt like an actual artist for the first time. I mean, there's steps, right? I mean, of course there's different, steps along the way, but seeing everything hang in a gallery setting curated by somebody other than me who understands, the work and put it together in a way that tells the story that we're looking to tell.
So important.
I mean, I'll never forget that first night that we got done hanging everything and just walking through and being like, wow.
Surreal.
I mean, just blown away, surreal. That's the best word for it. Yeah.
Man, I love that. It's such a challenge to go from, and this is for all you artists out there, and some of you are either having group shows and solo shows, and some of you are just hoping for the moment that you get into a group show, or you maybe have a solo show at some point. And there is such a difference than when you're creating work with nothing on the horizon, and when you're actually creating work for a show, and then you finish the show, and that work is curated down from what you may have created, and then it goes in the space, and you stand there and you get to look at it in the space.
Totally.
I mean, that's just such a different thing.
And not to take us off track, but you hit on a really important point that I think is pertinent for anybody who's making work, which is moving a piece into a different space in a different light, regardless if it's a show or not. Like, I'm sure you do that as well. But when you move it to a different, maybe you take it home and you see what it looks like during golden hour, during sunset, or you put it in a different, artificial light, whatever it might be. But that's a really interesting way to get to know the work while it's in process, but also appreciate it, once it's done. I actually I don't know about you, I have a similar experience when I edit photos of work as well. It's weird, but like it sort of deepens the relationship in a way with the work because you're looking at it, so closely under a, almost a literal microscope.
I want to touch on something before we move on to the next thing, because I just think this is, for me, it's really exciting to watch, because your work was only seen on Instagram. That's it. At that point in your art career, you were posting things on Instagram, studio process, going through work, and you had some small little pockets of artist community online and in different areas where you would discuss your work and others' work and things. But you went from just people seeing your work on Instagram and getting just those comments that are all a photo of the work or video of the work, to actually being able to witness people talk about your work in a room in front of it. How amazing was that feeling?
Well, and just watching people experience the work in person, and it doesn't matter what type of work we're talking about. It always looks better in person, but well, it should, unless somebody's really doctoring stuff up with Photoshop. It better look. If it does look better in person, then you're doing a little bit too much in the Photoshop there. Yeah, exactly. But I think especially because of the nature of how textured my work is, that first show, most of the pieces, almost all of them had a pretty large differential in depth between the outer layer and the inner layer. If people care, go look up my Instagram, whatever. But there was, because of that difference in depth, the angle, made a big difference in terms of like what was visible on that inner layer versus the outer layer. The texture, the intensity and angle of the light makes a huge difference as far as how that texture sort of presents itself. And so, just, watching, during the opening, the rare moments when you get to take a breath and kind of take a step back and just look at people looking at your work the same way they do when you're looking at other people's work, right? And when you're in a museum or when you're in a gallery, that was a really fulfilling moment. And it's something that I won't forget. I mean, I remember telling my wife, like, as we were leaving from that night from the opening, just looking back, from the street.
Yeah.
That was a really cool moment. I'll share this story. So we were leaving, said goodbye to everybody. Last ones to leave. Took some photos with the family. My wife and daughters came out for the opening and stuff like that. And so we're walking out to the car and just looking back and seeing my name, the name of the show on the gallery wall. Looking in and seeing some of the bigger feature pieces that we had put on the wall that faces the street, and thinking back to all the times that I had walked past galleries, when you're especially when you're in a downtown area, we've had a chance to travel a fair amount, you walk past galleries, and if they're not open or whatever, I anyway, just, peek in the windows and, look at so to have that experience and have the art on the wall be mine and the name on the, by the door be mine was surreal. Yeah.
That's probably one of my favorite things. I have a lot of people that I keep in contact with on Instagram who I've never met, right? It's your Instagram artist friends, that you've never met, but you talk about stuff. And my favorite thing is when they're sending me photos from their first show or even their second show or whatever, just being able to. I was in a conversation with an artist in Santa Barbara just last night who has a solo show coming up in April. And I have family in Santa Barbara. So we had talked about the next time I go visit, we can hang out. And he's got a solo show coming up and I can't be there because I'm out of the country. But just the fact that we get to talk about that and celebrate it. And I cannot wait to see his photos of his show because I know how difficult it is as the artist. You're in your studio or in your garage, wherever you're working, just slaving away at trying to create something that jumps for somebody else to take a chance on you with. For some of us, that takes a long time. For some people, it's a short time. But for all of us, the time and amount spent making the work is far, far larger than the time it takes. When you get a show, it lasts like that. It's gone. And then you're back in the studio for 6 months, 4 months, a year, whatever. Then you get another show and it's over in a month or a week. Or if you're starting out, it's over that night. You hang it Friday and it's down Saturday. I've done hundreds of those. They are a beating, but you're showing work, and that's the key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too. You think about, we spoke about this, I think, in our last episode on Clifford Still, the low moments.
Yeah.
And, I had a couple, be careful what you wish for moments too, where it's like, okay, cool. You have this opportunity, but those, 10, 15-hour days, which from my previous life, I am sort of conditioned for.
Yeah.
But boy, it's a different thing knowing that the deadline is you putting pieces of yourself into a wall, into a space, and knowing that it's going to be seen and judged, critiqued, taken in by other people. That there was a different type of stress than I had experienced before. And so thankfully for, this second show, I was at least prepared for knowing that those moments were going to come, which they inevitably did. Of course, hearing myself, whatever the inner critics say, there's no way this is going to be ready. It's not going to be done. It's not any good, blah, blah, blah. Sure. And just realizing like, this is part of it. This is part of the process. And, everything it will be exactly what it's supposed to be, when it's all said and done. That was very, very helpful. So for the second show, I was definitely more prepared for everything that was going to go along with it. We've talked about this off camera, but I think it's worth, hearing your input on this. I'd like to hear how many shows you've been a part of now is my first question. The follow-up question that I'm super interested in is, are you ever like totally ready 2 weeks beforehand? Or is it always on your way out the door, those last, few weeks being 80-hour weeks?
This is the thing,
because that's been my experience both times. It's been like,
and you and I talked
hey, honey,
about,
I live 10 minutes from the studio, but I'm going to be sleeping here tonight.
Right. And you and I talked about this leading up to your first show, is you do the best you can in the moment you have. And you take everything you learn from that experience to make the next one better. And especially as we're starting out, I mean, this should be our motto for everything we do. But when you're first starting out, you don't really know what to expect each time. And so you just need to do the best you can then. Otherwise, you're going to stress yourself and have expectations that you're not going to be able to meet. You do the best you can for that exhibition, for that show. And when you go view it, when it's up, now you take notes. Now you figure out what I need to do different next time. Do I need to prepare more time, which we all need to do getting ready for the show? But you kind of look at those things, and this comes in play. And doesn't matter if you're showing in a museum or showing in a gallery or showing in a cafe or a restaurant. Take mental notes of how to improve each time. And so I mean, this is a good segue into one of my recent shows this year, because I led into, what do I do? I'm finishing things right up to the deadline. And maybe I hit a stride, which I did in the last 2 weeks, of new ideas that I wanted to put in the show. I had my first small museum show this last year that was a 2-person exhibition with one of my closest friends in the world, Vino, Vietnamese American artist from Austin, Texas. We're basically brother, sister, twin to the hip. I love her more than anything. And we were asked to do a 2-person exhibition together, and the space is massive. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 gallery spaces within the museum, a big hall, 2 side spaces, and then a massive backspace. So
wow.
We had, I can't remember when we learned about the show. It might have been at the end of 2022. And then we had maybe 6 months to create work for the show, I think is about what it was, maybe 6 months.
Yeah.
And so we were going to kind of pair new and old work with the exhibition. And V, who is a physician, she's a doctor at a hospital in pediatrics in Austin, has a lot less time than me. And she also has 2 kids. To create that much new work for her, that's a tough challenge. I mean, talk about a powerful superwoman. V is it. As an artist, as a mother, as a physician. I don't understand it. I couldn't do it. She is a champion. So that's just to celebrate her as well for that. But I decided I'm going to create all new work. I'm going to do some things I haven't done before with sculpture. And we've talked about this. I've been wanting to do a large scale sculpture for a number of years, but I've been, number one, afraid to start. And so therefore I haven't done it for years. I've just sketched and thought of ideas. And so V and I got together, walked the space, and then decided, let's come up with a title for the show and what we want the show to encompass, and then we'll make work. And so we spent some time uploading songs to Spotify to find some lyrics, because music is a love language between us. So we made probably a playlist of about 40 to, it might have been about 100 songs that we were going through lyrics. And we both landed on the lyrics from the David Bowie song Changes, where he says, I watch the ripples change their size, but never leave the stream of warm impermanence. And so the days float through my eyes, but the days are still the same. Changes. And so we went with of warm impermanence for the style of everything is always changing. And we both have had things in our lives, from trauma to healing, to her being the daughter of refugee parents from Vietnam, and her life growing up in an all-white community in Pennsylvania as a Vietnamese female. And so my going through trauma in youth and all these different things, we kind of created how we're constantly changing in life and developing and creating newness out of things. And so we went to work on the show.
So you actually answered the biggest question that I had as you were talking. Of course, following you and now being a big fan of V's work as well, and seeing how it all came together was really interesting. But I was curious, and still am, maybe if you could speak just a little bit more to what it's like to put together a show of that scale and type. with another artist in keeping. So I guess just kind of carry that through. Like, so how did you then take the title,
Yeah.
those lyrics, and just make sure that aesthetically, without the backstory, just walking in. And I know that it was, in my opinion, very successful, because it definitely looked as though it was supposed to be the way that it was. But how did you achieve that just from a visual standpoint?
So I think number one was trust. I think that was the key thing. It's very rare that you get to have a group show with artists that you know and have developed work with and been a part of their creation for a very long period of time. So for about 10 years, V and I have been showing together, looking at each other's work, talking to each other about our work, seeing each other develop, done things. So there was a massive trust component. I knew her work was going to be strong. She had faith and trust in my work. We didn't see any of each other's work up until we brought it up to curate the show. And it flowed so beautifully and so magic. I mean, it was almost supernatural when we started throwing all of the work around for our friend Dr. Jane Dameron and Morgan Earring to curate the work. We kind of stood around and we're going, oh my gosh, how did this work so beautifully? And I think it is an absolute trust component, Nathan.
That's amazing. I think, you brought something up too. We both kind of spoken to it, but I think, as we try to continue to pull out the useful tidbits and the useful threads, one of the things that the stress of the deadlines around preparing for, a show, it's stressful, but it's also very useful.
Yeah.
I'm going to speak to and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but I find it to be very helpful in sort of sharpening the scalpel of editing, right? What stays, what doesn't. One of my sort of mantras in the studio is show your work. I want for the dirty, messy, marks, the bits that are gritty to still show. And I know you do that as well. And so the timeline of knowing, hey, there's a deadline for this. I don't have the luxury of sitting with it for days, weeks at a time and figuring out, what the next little step might be. While stressful, is also very helpful in moving the work forward. And some of those little moments that at the time actually felt kind of rushed, where I was like, I don't know, end up in some cases being some of the most interesting and I think successful pieces that I personally made.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry Salt says the artist's best friend is deadlines, I believe, because there's
finish the damn thing.
Finish
right?
it. There's pressure that's pushing you in a good way to finish and not overthink, because usually when we overthink, we screw it up a lot of times. So I love the deadline. I wish I had more deadlines, even though I get really stressed out, let's say more anxious than stressed, where I'm just really kind of shaken a little bit like, oh my gosh, can I get this done? But it almost pushes me to create things I might not have come up with if I didn't have the deadline.
Well, and there's nothing like a real deadline
absolutely
to accomplish that. But we can sort of manufacture some self-imposed deadlines to prepare for that. I mean, I guess I could be curious if that's something that you advise your mentees about, and I feel like I've heard you talk about this before, conditioning yourself to be able to, when it's time to really go for an intentional purpose, to whatever, just get used to setting a deadline and sticking to it, even though it's just one that you've made for yourself.
In that, one of the things that I tell young artists all the time, not age wise, but career young, is create work like you're creating for a show. So don't just go in there and just kind of half-ass a piece here and one here and one here. Like, think through what a body of work would look like in a space and create with the goal of it going in a space on its own at some point in your career. For me, when I started doing that, that's when ideas really started to flow. That's when things really started to jump off the canvas for me, when I started to create as if I had a show coming. If that makes sense.
It does. Let's. I want to hear you talk more about the work from that show and other shows that you've had. In the meantime, let's get into the work. How is your work evolved and moved forward in these last couple of years? What have you learned? What are you really excited about moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I had a show. So both my museum show at Art Center Waco and a solo exhibition I had at Vaughn Gallery in Austin in January 23 had some experimental pieces in there. And as I've been working on developing with my use of cardboard for transfer prints with all my work and painting with my hands and texture and things, I had for the first time shown pieces where I use canvas to sculpt on top of canvas in my show at Vaughn Gallery. Now, some of it I feel like was successful, and others I'm like, oh, I could have done that better. Oh, I should have done this. But I did 38 total works for that show, and we curated that down to 26. And so moving from that show into a show 6 months later in the museum, I was going to show a mix of work, but I thought, what better to grow than to force myself to do all new work for the museum show? So I ended up creating 26 total pieces with 5 sculptures, 21 paintings that range from 10 feet to 4 feet with an 8-foot by 16-foot sculpture installation as well in that. But all of the solo show work is what really pushed me into ideas for that show in the exhibition.
Well, and you hit on a good point too, which I think was a very useful takeaway for me, which is you don't really know if you're ready until you just jump in and do it. There's no way of like, there's no metric for like, okay, I'm ready. You know, you just got to jump in and put yourself out there and create a situation again, even if you got to create it for yourself, where you have to sort of, put yourself on the line and just see and you'll learn. Right.
Well, and let's, okay. I want to jump into a learning thing here, because you had, with your recent show, you had a new learning experience for your art career, which was an article in LA Weekly. And whether you've done articles for other things in the past in your career stuff, like being able with a reporter, a journalist, to talk about your art and talk about what you're doing and talk about all these things that we talk about all the time, but to condense that down right into an article that flows enough, that's exciting enough to explain your work, explain who you are, why you're making your work, and about the upcoming show. That was a learning experience for you as well. And I want to celebrate because that's exciting. I'm excited that you got to do that.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun. A little nerve-wracking because it's one thing to have sort of this long form like we do to like work our way, and you and I are both how should we say it? Neither of us is real, precise with short thoughts or we can get to talking, which is great in a long form setting. You can get it out and it's great. And having been a guest on podcast telling my story, you've got the space, right? But in an article where obviously they've got a limited amount of real estate that this feature is going to take up, limited amount of words to work with, it is a little nerve wracking and curious, like how's this going to turn out and what is the finished product, actually going to be. But I was very happy with how it turned out, and it was cool. It was just a really neat experience for sure.
And I think if people just searched Nathan Terborg, LA Weekly, they could find that article would pop up on Google.
It should. Okay. Yeah. Do we link stuff in the show notes?
Yeah, we can link it in. We can link that article in the show notes and link it on YouTube as well. I'll probably do a video on YouTube of it scrolling and show, but yeah, we'll link it. We'll figure out a way for people to be able to check that out.
Which is something else for season 2. If you're a listen only person, we do put the videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
So go check it out there.
Yeah, definitely.
If you are so inclined. All right. We just did a really bad job of even mentioning that. I think.
We're on YouTube as well.
Yeah. Something that you said as well, Ty, about the experimental stuff. This is one sort of like lesson learned for me and an interesting takeaway that was really important for me to really wrap my head around, which is that what feels extremely experimental and different to you, to the individual artist who's creating it, still looks like your work. It's not as different to every other set of eyeballs looking at it as it is to you. That was a really helpful takeaway for me to really arrive at, which is like, okay, this feels like I'm way over my skis and trying something completely different. And then I would share it with you or somebody else and say, does this even fit? Right? Does this flow with everything else that's going to be in the show? And they're like, yeah, totally. I can absolutely tell that's your work. So to you, like when you talk about the experimental stuff that you worked into, the different shows, has that been your experience, with that show? And I guess just even, in general as well.
It's been a really interesting experience because some people weren't ready for such a change. And some people absolutely loved the change, right? And we talk about how don't listen to the audience, make your work, period. But we do need to put it out to the audience and see how the audience responds. Now, that doesn't mean that you listen to the audience when they respond. right? Because
Yeah.
the audience says no. Well, they just may not be ready for it yet. And so keep working on it. And then on the other hand, if everybody loves it, well, is that the right audience that loves it? Is it the NART audience or your Instagram followers? You know, is it your mom or is it an actual art critic? Those things. So the audience is always a difficult one. But I got to the point where I said, I've got to try these things because they're in my head. And I worked them out to where I felt comfortable enough with showing them. Because there's plenty of them I was not comfortable enough with showing. So I didn't show them. And they're still in my studio, or I've ripped them apart and started new stuff on them. So at the end of the day, you want to be comfortable enough with showing it and not taking a risk of this really looks bad. I'm just going to go ahead and try it anyways.
And that's that honoring of the muse, right?
Sure.
That Pressfield talks about, or a lot of different things that Rick Rubin talked about in his book that's come out since we recorded season 1. But just that idea of like the idea, the inspiration, the thing is coming to you for a reason, and it's our responsibility to do something with it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that the thing that we do with it is going to be the next thing that's on the feature wall when you walk into, you know, the next show. But it does mean, and this is one thing that I found as well, like in preparing for these last couple shows, is that I've got stacks and stacks of, you know, failed experiments. Well, I guess we'll call them studies. They weren't necessarily meant to be, but they are all little clues and little, what's the word where you bury something? I'm trying to remember.
Excavation.
You know what I mean? No. Where you like a little time capsule.
Oh, time capsules.
It's a little, but it's something that captures the idea in a way that it doesn't have to be successful as an individual piece. But for me, that's my little reminder. That's my full scale Post-it note. Like, this is something that may or may not be worth exploring. And something else something else cool that's happened in the last couple of years, and this actually is a lifelong dream that came true, is that I had an artist reach out, a musical artist reach out and ask if they could use my art for the cover of an album. Yeah. And that was incredible. So I'll share that story and then bring me back to how I got to the. So actually, I've got one of them right here. So I've got a frame one as well, but this is a piece that I did a couple years ago, but like they did a really good job with the album art. This is a shout out to Chaos Log out of Berlin. This is like hard, melt your face techno. But what they did with the album art, and it's a two album set. You can see different images.
Love it.
They did some really cool stuff with the photographs and with the images. And a little book as well. This could be a whole side tangent, but I'm curious, what was one of the most impactful pieces of album art that you remember seeing early on, where you're like, oh, music isn't just about what you hear, and it kind of is now.
That's easy
because of how we're consuming it. But
that's easy. Magical Mystery Tour by the Beatles. That was one of my favorite albums as a kid. My dad had the record, and it was a book. And it wasn't because it had graphic images of colors and kind of stars shooting out with the band, you know, on the cover and the colors, but it was more the performance aspect of the booklet inside, of them in costume and running around in the hills and doing things, and the way that the music married that book within the vinyl, to me as a kid, was just phenomenal. I mean, that's a big one for me, for sure.
So for me, it was one of the first albums that I bought. It was The Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails. Mm-hmm. That album and the music as well, but the art inside of it. So Russell Mills is the name of the artist that did all that album art. But I'll never forget, you know, being early high school, maybe 8th, 9th grade, and like flipping through. So for you young kids that have only streamed music before, there was a time we need to go physically buy albums and either, you know, records or CDs in this case, that, you know, you pull out and you'd read those lyrics and you'd look at. But I'll never forget the experience of looking at that album art. So anyway, so when this opportunity came up, I was like, yeah, absolutely, yes, please. Yep. And so I got a couple copies of this record that they were kind enough to send me. One of them's framed, and the other one just kind of sits around, but that was really neat. My point, wow, bringing myself back, look at that, is that this piece that I did, I think maybe late 21,
Yeah.
let's say, maybe early, I don't know, maybe early 2022. But it was one of the very first experiments that I made. I'll look at my studio director saying, "What's up?"
Hey, Leo.
What's up, dude? I must have made a mistake. I must have said something wrong. He'll have to correct me later. But that was one of my first experiments with tarp, with repurposed billboard tarp. Yeah. And it's something that I'm really proud of that piece. I like how it turned out, but that was definitely in I'll say a season for me where I was just trying, every single piece was a brand new, adventure that in many cases had very little to do with the one that had come before it. And so this is a great example of like, I had that thing, a physical reminder of what I had looked back at. And actually when this opportunity came up, I was like, man, that tarp is, because I pulled out the piece that was just sitting and hadn't sold. I had it just, whatever, stored away. But I was like, man, this tarp's a great material. Let me revisit that. And that then became a couple years later what made up, I mean, there's a version of different types of tarps, landscaping, billboard, other materials that makes up. I mean, there's at least a shred of it in probably 70-80% of my current show. So point being, when the idea comes, try it, set it aside. Doesn't mean you need to like dedicate the next 9 months of your making time to it. But just know that if it's supposed, like a boomerang, if it's supposed to come back, it will. But I think the important thing is doing something with it when it comes. Absolutely. I'm not somebody who's just going to write an idea down, because I don't know about you, but when the idea comes, it's just hey, try this. It's not a fully formed thing that I could just write out and say, hey,
right,
revisit this down the road. I need to do something with it and then have that for later.
Love it.
But what about you? I know you've had some really cool things happen over the last couple of years we haven't talked about yet as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some things that have been really fun. And I think for me, there was a moment last year where I was really down. Work just didn't feel good. I'm prepping for the museum exhibition, and I was just really kind of like frustrated with where things were going. And I was working with plaster and wire and all these things on canvas, and it wasn't working. And honestly, you know how you feel in those moments. You almost want to throw the towel in and go, why in the world am I doing this? And I get an Instagram message from another artist overseas that says, hey, they talked about you on my favorite podcast yesterday. Did you hear it? But he never sent the link. And I went, well, what podcast is it? Where is this? Who's talking about me? I want to know. So he sent me the link, and it's a podcast from the UK that is with the comedians Joe Wilkinson and David Earl. And it's called Chatabix. And I had not heard of it yet. And I'm now addicted to it. And I laugh so hard. And these guys have been in films with Ricky Gervais, and they've had indie films that have been very successful. They're two brilliant comedians and actors and writers. And lo and behold, on this podcast, they had one of my favorite people on the planet, Russell Tovey from the Talk Art podcast this day. And they talked about my work. And it was one of those things that when I listened to it, I was in tears. I was on the floor. I just needed a lift. And I know that they probably don't know this, but it lifted me so much to just go, okay, I'm doing this for a purpose and I'm doing the right things.
Yeah.
Oh, it was insane.
So any chance you get to make somebody's day, just
do it.
Go ahead and take advantage of that. Yeah, do that for them. Can we listen to it?
Yeah, let's.
Can we? I've heard it, but I'd like to be refreshed.
Let's put it on. I'm going to be in tears just replaying that day because it was so emotional. Here we go.
Paul, but
Russell, I've put two bits of work in Zoom.
This is yours.
No. This is someone I adore.
Oh.
Why do I adore what he's doing?
Oh, that's cool.
Have a look.
He's called Ty Nathan Clark. Why do I love it so much?
I do love the fact.
Do you like the text in it and stuff? Do you like Cy Twombly then? Have you seen his work?
Yes. I love Cy Twombly.
So there's like handwriting in there, and then he's crossed it out. So I guess
I've done some handwriting on mine and just thought, but you're just copying that guy.
But that's all right. But all artists copy artists. That's what happens.
Yeah.
So but then you evolve, don't you, as well? Then you find something you like in it and go, oh, mine's a bit different now because I'm doing that. And stuff.
I love Ty Nathan Clark. I really love his work.
It's a great photo of him in the paint as well, though, isn't it? He looks part of the painting, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you like it because there's It looks simple, but there's so much depth to it, and it's
quite
like
childish, childlike, or
childlike, yeah. And it's coded, isn't it? So a lot of you're getting messages in there that you aren't privy to, but he's trying to tell you something, but he doesn't really want you to know because he's crossing them out. And that's within an artwork, you can code so many things that you are unaware. There's so many artists that have made work, like Keith Haring, for example, or an artist called David One-Year-Old.
I'm emotional. My heart's beating. I've got tears welling up. I mean, I'm about to lose it right now emotionally. Like, these are those moments that, give me a sec here. These are those moments where the days that suck and are horrible, and you throw the work out and you just don't want to do it because you don't feel like anybody's ever going to recognize it. Nobody's going to see your work. Nobody wants to buy it. I have this big show coming up and the work's going to look like shit. These are those moments that just hit you right in the heart, and you go, thank you for giving me that sign and that notice that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And they're rare. Yeah. They're very rare for artists. Yeah. So for me, that was one of those moments where I fell on the floor in my studio. I was stretching work the days, and I was just like, what just happened?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not every day that you get compared to Cy Twombly and Keith Haring in the same sentence.
I have no words.
Maybe it is.
But... No.
Yeah. No, that was so cool for me to hear as well, because I think that, let's just talk about the beauty of the question of why do I love this? Right? Why do I adore this?
Right.
It's just like, so to what I hear, knowing you, knowing your work and the experience of viewing it, what I hear is I want to know why I love it, but the most important thing is that I love it, right? Like in the context of this conversation, having listened to the whole podcast, he was asking somebody who was as or more experienced, and knowledgeable about art in general. Why do I love this? Which the subtext is, why do you love it? Right. So when the response was in kind, that was really, really cool. And I think that to be seen, I'm going to go out on a limb here. You can tell me if I'm correct or not, but I believe that one of the things that made it so impactful, I'm guessing, is that you felt seen as well.
Absolutely.
When they talked about the coding, him trying to tell you something, but not, telling you explicitly, right? Like that is what a big part of what you're doing, right?
Absolutely. And, there's, in my work, I have lots of hidden moments because my work's based on memory, right? And so memory is clear and it's unclear. It's broken and it's full. And so in my work, I have all those moments where memories are hidden and then memories are in the forefront, but there's things hidden and there's bits and pieces that are broken and pieces that are more full. So for somebody to actually kind of get that as well, right? You're like, oh yes, somebody is actually getting it. And that is huge for us as artists to get that feedback. Rein my emotions back in here, Nathan. I'm an emotional guy. I'm an artist. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. So, but you had a really fun podcast in this time as well that you got to do as an interviewee on a podcast with Mike Henley. It's called Drawing Inspiration with Mike Henley. Like, talk about that experience. How did that happen? How did it come about? And tell us that story.
That was really fun. That was a neat experience to be asked by Mike, who I got to know back in the Clubhouse days. If any of you artists hopped on Clubhouse during the period of time that was an active, it was great for a good year and a half. It was really cool. But I met a lot of artists that way. Became aware of him, his work, and his podcast, and became a fan of the podcast. So to be asked to be a guest was really cool. And I've been on a couple of others as well, but that was definitely the one where I feel like, I just felt the best about like kind of how I told my backstory and kind of how I got to be here. So if anyone is curious, we'll link to that as well. But I went pretty deep on the work, what happened in the 20 years between, last making art that has now given me the space to tell those stories and to communicate and process, what the twists and turns that life took, for me. But that was really neat. Well, and that was really fun to be heard that way.
Being able to talk about our art, our whys, our hows are so important for us for artists, because we need to practice talking about our art. We need the practice. So suggestions for the artists out there, do live Instagrams with other artists that you know. Because if you're not at the point where you're going to have a podcast reaching out to you and saying, hey, would you come on for an interview? Do your own things, right? It's the same thing with showing your work. If you're not in the gallery world yet, find ways to show your work at coffee shops, at cafes, at restaurants. Ask somebody if you can borrow a room in their building and do a show and invite people. It's the same thing with the experience of talking about our work. We want to be able to express our work in a way that is short, not too long-winded, so that when we do have a show and we're asked to give an artist talk at the gallery, we've practiced and we feel comfortable. And a lot of us may not like speaking in public. So if you can practice with an artist friend on an Instagram Live where you know people are watching you, but they're not in the room with you, it's great practice for you to learn how to talk about and express what you're trying to do with your work for the moment someday that you get asked to do an artist talk or be on a podcast or be interviewed by somebody. Practice, practice, practice is massive. It's so good to have those experiences.
Huge. Repetition always wins, and all reps count.
Absolutely.
There's a difference between, we'll go back to being, jocks for a second, but in the sports, space, like every repetition matters, and consequential repetitions in a game situation, are heavier. They mean more in the moment, but those practice reps at the field, in the studio, when no one's watching, it's all a version of, muscle memory. It's all that experience counts, and it adds up, and it prepares us for whatever might be coming next. So we can wait until the opportunities present themselves, or we can create situations where we get to at least get closer to being ready for, whatever might come, when it does. I think that what you just shared, it's probably a good place for us to sort of begin to wind down as we talk about just the work, tangible takeaways from our studio practice. I mean, I think that a huge part, for me anyway, and I suspect for most artists, is just figuring out, like, how do I go about doing this?
Yeah.
Like, what's the best, what's the optimal way? There's no right or wrong way. That's why we love art. There's no, black and white answer, but how do we do it in a way? How do we continue to evolve our practice in a way that pushes the work forward and helps us to, I guess, evolve and grow as quickly as possible? Because that for me is, of the things that I think about around my artistic practice, one of the biggest is, how can I accelerate my progression? And I asked you that during the mentorship program. You're like, how can I? And that's just kind of how I'm wired. 3 on the Enneagram with the 4 wing, for those of you that know about all that. But I just, how can I get better as fast as, but really just thinking about, how can I accelerate my progression? How can I push the work forward? What can I do? And I think that, for me, it's a matter of just paying attention to what works for you and what doesn't. I'll give an example. One of the biggest things that I learned in between my first and second show, and really lean into these last couple months preparing for this current one, is how affected I am by the space that I'm in. And that's probably true for all of us. We're visual animals, right? So for me, I realized I had this moment in the studio where I had a dozen different works in progress, all sort of sitting out on the wall, which looks cool when you take a studio shot. And I still have moments where, like, that actually is a practical thing for me to do. But I found that if it's out and visible, I can't look at something that's in process without immediately, whether consciously or subconsciously, going to work trying to solve whatever problem is hanging out there, or trying to resolve whatever, how to apply, whatever idea comes to mind, which is great if I'm going to be working on that particular piece. If I'm not, though, it's draining the battery. We all have a finite amount of, mental and emotional, resources, physical, during the day, to work with. So for me, I realized if I'm not intending to possibly work on a piece, I put it out of my line of sight. So that also applies to material. Like for me, my palette is not colors. My palette is material, some of which I've worked and some of which I haven't. So for me to have all of my entire palette of materials, visible, to have the hay bale netting, the packing plastic, the rusted metal, the copper wire, all of the random stuff that I might be applying to a particular piece is really important for me to have that organized and labeled, because I mean, I'm a pretty simple creature. Like when I see messes, when I see disorganization in my visual space, I can't, like, I'm just not. I've had a artist visit my studio a little while back, and he's like, "Man, you are super organized." And I said, "The only by necessity is because I'm so disorganized, up here. I have to have," and I get yellow duct tape, and I use a black Sharpie. Those are my labels. Like whatever version of call it what you want. But that is for me, one of the things I've learned, again, just by paying attention. So that what I'm talking about specifically may or may not apply to you, but I think that if there's a takeaway for this for people listening, it's just pay attention to what works and try new things, not just with your artwork, but around your artistic practice. Because the process is what leads to the outcome, the results that we're excited about. So just thinking about, how can I optimize my space? How can I optimize my time? How can I optimize my practice to be able to, create the most authentic work that is true to who you are and what you're trying to say?
There's some incredible takeaways from there. And I want to piggyback on what you said with some takeaways of my own for that reason. And I'm going to give 2 examples as well. But number one, make, right? We talk about that all the time. That's why the podcast is called Just Make Art. Because at the end of the day, if you're not doing that, nothing else is going to follow. So just make art.
We didn't think through a lot, but we did think through our title.
Think through the title. Yeah. So make art, experiment, play, try new things. Don't be afraid. Number 2, look at a lot of art. Read, watch, study. Oh, I just made the balloon thing go up. So that'll be incredible on YouTube because I just did the peace sign on my phone and balloons. So look at work, go to galleries, go to museums, do those things. Yeah, you should get some too, hopefully. And number 3, don't be afraid to put your work out there. Don't be afraid to get out there. So a couple things with that. I go to the Museum of Fine Arts Houston all the time because I'm a member there. Just to key up that story, where do you want to be with your art someday? Get involved there. Is it in the gallery scene? Go to shows. Go to every show. What gallery do you want to be in? Go to every single one of their shows. If you want to be in the museum world, find ways to get into the museum world. I go to the Museum of Fine Arts regularly, and I do little reels when I'm there about the work, and I talk about it. Well, I got a random email one day from the PR director of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. Would you like to come to all of our directors' previews with the curators, with the artist, with small group of people, 20 to 30 people? And so now I get to go do that because I was showing up and doing reels and giving them love and talking about the work. I got an invitation to do that. I never thought I'd be able to do that with the director of the museum and the curators and people like Philip Guston's daughter and the curators of his show, those type of things. It's exciting for me, and I get to rub elbows with journalists and writers and things. And it's part of the game. We have to rub elbows and network. Putting your work out there. Find ways to get your work seen by others. Even if you're doubting yourself sometimes. I'm in a group with the amazing art critic, Patty Johnson, who I've followed since her days with Art Fag City years ago, the blog that was one of my favorites. And in this network, we had the ability to share our work in a slideshow with the director, Miles McInerney of the Miles McInerney Gallery in New York. He's got 4 galleries there. And there's 280 people putting work in this slide. And he was going to choose a handful of those to discuss for a minute, each artist. And he was only going to choose, I think, 25 or 30 artists. And I got onto the slideshow and I went to put my work in and I started looking at everybody's work. And I went, I don't have a chance for him to even see mine. My work is so below everybody here. I mean, I was blown away by the sculptors, the visual artists, the painters that were putting work in this slideshow that's a part of this network with Patty. And I thought, no way he will ever see my work. Well, I went ahead and put 2 paintings in. A couple weeks later, when they did the online review of work, my work was one of the artists selected in there. And I couldn't believe it. So it's like, and not that my work was better than anybody else's in there, because I still feel like I wasn't even close to anybody in those slides. But for some reason, his eyes and what he liked, I stuck out to him. If I had not put my work out there, he wouldn't have had the chance to maybe see it. The beautiful thing about art is somebody likes your work. Somebody likes your work. There is somebody out there that will love what you do and love what you create and love what you're making. So never be shy about putting your work out there.
And you're never going to know who.
You'll never know who.
They get a chance to see
right?
it.
It's like you, Nathan, with another gallery in Taylor in Denver. You didn't know. He sent, hey, we're opening a gallery. We'd love for you to show. I've had plenty of those moments. You don't know who's watching. So you need to be acting like people are watching you if you're an artist.
Yep. Yeah. And again, just, don't believe everything that you think.
Yeah.
My practice is to not believe most of what I
just
think.
Keep grinding, keep putting it out there, keep rolling.
Yeah. It's funny that's actually the same way that the museum
the Still Museum,
the Clifford Still Museum. That's how that social media takeover came to be, was putting my work out there, having visited the museum, multiple times, tagging them on posts, right? So just whatever, edifying and reinforcing, what you were sharing before, like that's how that stuff happens. So they reached out and asked if I'd like to be the featured artist for March to do their social media takeover. And that's kind of how that all came about. But I think it's important to maybe land our plane with just, actually, you had something in mind. I cut you off just now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as we start, and go back and check out our last episode, which was on Clifford Still, and Nathan is at the Clifford Still Museum in Denver doing his half of the interview. So, and I talk about how jealous I am in that, so I don't have to reiterate that. But I think, what do you have coming up for the rest of the year yourself, Nathan? Do you have anything on the horizon? Is there anything you're looking forward to that's coming up for the rest of 2024?
Nothing concrete, so I'm not gonna discuss anything that's not in black and white. I think what I'm most excited about, though, for the rest of this year and going forward is just continuing to pull the thread on the veins, plural, the veins of work that really is stirring my soul, right now. I think that's again, back to what you said before, just make art and make a lot of it. That's one of the tremendous advantages of making, as I have the last couple shows, way more work than I needed, or let me rephrase, starting way more work than I needed, is that I'm coming back. I came back, to a studio full of another, I've got, I don't know, probably 15, 18 pieces that just didn't quite push themselves across the finish line, or, raise their hand quite as urgently or excitedly as the others that made it, but that I'm really excited to dive back into now with a little bit more space between, with some new ideas, some new tools in my toolkit to really get after. So that's awesome. What I'm most excited about is getting back to work on the things that are already down the line and just kind of seeing where they go.
Love it.
You?
Yeah, I've got a lot coming up. I'm a little in the weeds right now, prepping for a solo exhibition in Austin. That is through my dealer in Houston, Monart, and Jennifer Monteleone, curating a wonderful show at All Saints Gallery that will be running the month of April while I am gone, because I have a month-long residency in Newfoundland at the Pooch Cove residency that is run by the James Beard Gallery with some of our really good friends, which is going to be really exciting. Yeah. So for a month, there will be 8 of us at the Pooch Cove residency, and we have an exhibition at the end through the James Beard Gallery. So excited about that, to just get out in the furthest northeast region of North America on the cliffs, with the salt water and snow blowing and icebergs floating by, making art with a group of dear friends. And there's a few other things coming up that I'm excited about. Affordable Art Fair Austin in May. So I've got kind of a little sprint for the next few months. So I've been stretching work constantly, shipping work, getting ready for the art courier to come Friday, and then hopping a plane to Canada. So I've got a lot going on, and I'm excited for it.
That's exciting. I would be remiss if I didn't share that my current solo exhibition is on view through the end of April. That Which Remains is the name of the show. It'll be on view at another gallery in Denver at 345 Santa Fe Drive.
Perfect.
In Denver through the end of April as well.
Well, we have what we think is a really fun season ahead. So I hope you enjoyed this special break in our episodes, just for Nathan and I to say, this is what we're doing. This is who we are, as you get to know us better. And we've got some really fun things coming up this season. And I know we shared, actually Russell Tovey talked about Keith Haring in the podcast, a little interview about me there for a minute. And Nathan and I have been discussing a really fun Keith Haring episode sometime this season that will be coming, and I'm a huge Keith fan.
We may or may not read the new book that came out, but
yeah,
I think we got the gist of it.
Yeah, who knows? But anyways, fun stuff coming. Go make art. Find us on Instagram. Let us know what you think about what we're doing here with the podcast, and leave us a review or a comment wherever you listen or watch on YouTube, and we will see you soon.
We did not know what we were doing the first season. We still don't, but we're slightly less clueless now than ever before. Slightly. So stay tuned for more of whatever this is.
Slightly.
How now, brown cow. Unique New York.